I'm going to talk to you about three things that we as girls and women enjoy here in the US and in other Western democracies, and that women in the Middle East and in other parts of the developing world lack. The first point is, I would say, childhood. Being a child and doing what children do as a girl, play with toys, imaginative play, have little girlfriends around you, that carefree world that the child enjoys. A lot of that is missing for women in many parts of the Middle East and other developing countries. Obviously, part of that, the deprivation of childhood, comes from poverty, just a lack of material things, so that children, both girls and boys, are put to work at an age as early as 5 or 6 or 7 years old, when they can't bear the responsibility of work, but families have no choice but to put them to work. I think the second element that is missing for girls and women in the Middle East, in Muslim majority countries, is the ownership of their own bodies. So even when they develop and become older and transition from being a child to being a woman, we take a lot of things for granted here in the US. As a young woman, you get just the time to enjoy that transition. And eventually, you will grow up and you will make your own choices. And here in the US, I know that this isn't true for every single girl, but for most girls, it's taken for granted that you go to school and that you finish school, that you learn a vocation to the best of your ability, that you go on to college, and that beyond college, you have the opportunity to pursue a career. That for many women, perhaps most women in the Middle East and in other developing countries, is just not there. Very often, their parents or their families, their guardians, decide for individual girls who they're going to marry and at what age they're going to marry. And that very often happens when they are minors. So I just want you to imagine being 13 or 14 or 15 years old. And in some cases, I've seen these stories in Yemen, in Somalia, in Iraq, in Syria, where girls as young as 8 have been married off. What does an 8-year-old child know about marriage and the responsibilities of marriage? But even if you're not 8 and you're 18, you still have no ownership over your own body. It is your male guardians, your family, who decide who you're going to marry. And once you're married off, then your husband is your male guardian. And he decides how many times he's going to have sex with you, when he's going to do it, how many children you're going to have. You are never, ever in control of your own destiny. Just reflect on that. And then I think the third element that most women in the Middle East and in Africa, that they yearn for, is not only to have the freedom to be able to determine what their own destiny is and who they marry eventually, but when they get an opportunity to work or when their labor is exploited, very often they don't get to keep the fruits of their labor. You will see in the Middle East women who organize themselves and who work very hard and who raise money, but they have no control over what to do with that money, what to do with the exploits of their labor. Many of them, and Afghanistan, I think, is a fantastic example, realized as women that they need to rise above being domestic pets or people who are exploited on the domestic level. They organize for political activism. They learn as much as they can about how it works within the tribal setting, or how it works within these political settings, political environment, whether you are an elected official or whether you can get the consent of the population to hold office. And what we see over and over again in the Middle East and in other developing countries is that women who attempt to hold office are looked down with contempt. They're seen as dangerous. And over again, there are attempts to turn into law what custom is. And the custom is women should hold no office because God hasn't created them that way. It's against the nature of being a female to hold office, to hold those kinds of responsibilities. So very often what you see is the reaction to women in power. And that reaction is not only that the misogynistic men, not all men, but only those who really find it difficult to have women leaders, they organize and they claim that the breakdown of society and the chaos of society comes from putting women in leadership positions. So when they become leaders, they organize themselves to deprive women of these positions. You see all of this unfolding in Afghanistan. When the United States left after this dramatic withdrawal in August, what you see is that the Taliban have come into power. And what are the first things that they have done? Closed schools. Why do they close schools? They see women with an education as a threat to their society and to male society and to the ideology that the Taliban hold. They have kicked women out of office, the offices that they hold of responsibility, whether they're in parliament, whether they're in cabinet positions, whether they are mayors or in other types of local political positions. All these women have been kicked out and they have been shunned and put back at home. That is not just the case in Afghanistan. It is the case almost anywhere and almost everywhere. This back and forth where it is for so many men in these parts of the world completely alien and unacceptable to see women as leaders. They only see women as submissive, half-human beasts of burden. Women are there to reproduce. They're there to have sex within the confines of marriage. And other than that, they have to put up and they have to shut up. And how this works out in society and in these societies, you see it, because I think depriving women of their rights, banishing them from the public space, banishing them from leadership positions, banishing them from schools, the outcome of that is a society that's broken. When you force women into motherhood, they don't become good mothers. They may try to, but they can't because they're forced into the situation. When you force women into becoming wives, they don't become good wives because they're forced into that situation. They're put within the confines where all they can do is resent their positions. And of course, there are very many women, millions of them, who heroically rise to the occasion and try to make the best of the situation that they've been put in. But still, women deprived of education, women deprived of freedom, women deprived of the fruits of their labor leads to broken societies. And if you rank the world's nation states, you will see that the societies that deprive women of, girls and women of their rights, those are the societies that are at the very bottom in terms of income, in terms of stability, in terms of security, and in terms of life expectancy, not only for girls and women, but also for boys and men. For you students here at Yale and in the US, in the United States of America, I want you to acknowledge that as girls and women, we do have problems in America. We have lots of challenges, but what you see in the Middle East, what you see in Muslim majority countries, what you see in developing countries is incomparable.